In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, where life buzzed with energy and stories unfolded on every corner, a young woman named Jasmine Williams was just trying to get home after a long day at work. She had been teaching her students all afternoon, pouring her heart into lessons about history and hope, and now she simply wanted to unwind in the comfort of her own space. The sun was beginning its descent, casting warm golden hues over the city streets as Jasmine turned onto her block. A quiet residential area lined with modest houses and friendly faces. As she drove, her mind wandered to thoughts of dinner. Maybe she'd heat up leftovers or whip up something quick but satisfying. Her favorite playlist hummed softly from the car speakers, filling the small space with soulful melodies that matched her mood. Life felt peaceful, until it wasn't. Suddenly, flashing blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't noticed any signs of speeding or breaking traffic rules, so why was she being pulled over? Still, she knew better than to panic. Taking a deep breath, she signaled and eased her car to the side of the road, parking neatly under a street lamp. She glanced back at the police cruiser behind her. Its headlights illuminated her car, creating an almost surreal glow around her. For a moment, she sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady herself. "Stay calm," she whispered aloud, reminding herself that this was likely just a routine stop. Perhaps a taillight was out, or maybe there had been some misunderstanding. Whatever it was, she resolved to handle it with grace. Moments later, the officer emerged from his vehicle. His nameplate read Reynolds, though Jasmine didn't know him personally. Officer Mark Reynolds had earned a reputation in the neighborhood, not for kindness or fairness, but for his sharp tongue and intimidating presence. Those who lived nearby often spoke of his confrontational style during stops, especially when dealing with people of color. But Jasmine didn't think much of these rumors until now. Officer Reynolds approached her window with slow, deliberate steps. His boots clicked against the pavement, each step echoing louder than necessary. When he finally reached her car, he leaned down, peering inside with narrowed eyes. His expression was unreadable, but his body language screamed hostility. Without even greeting her, he barked, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Jasmine blinked, taken aback by his tone. Normally, officers would start with a simple question or explanation, but this felt different. It wasn't curiosity. It was accusation. Still, she forced a polite smile and responded calmly, "No, sir, I'm not sure. Can you tell me what happened?" Instead of answering, Reynolds straightened slightly, crossing his arms over his chest. He scanned her car as if searching for hidden clues before returning his gaze to her face. "License and registration," he demanded curtly, ignoring her attempt at civility. Jasmine nodded, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She reached into her purse for her license and then leaned across the seat to retrieve the registration from the glove compartment. Every action was careful, measured, designed to show cooperation. Yet, despite her best efforts, tension crackled in the air between them. When she handed over the documents, Reynolds barely glanced at them. Instead, he seemed fixated on her demeanor, scrutinizing every word and gesture. Finally, he spoke again, his voice laced with thinly veiled disdain. "You teachers always think you're smarter than everyone else, don't you? Like you're too good to follow the rules." The comment caught Jasmine off guard. She frowned, unsure how to respond. Was this really happening? She hadn't done anything wrong, yet here was this man making assumptions about her based on her profession, and possibly her race. She chose her words carefully, determined not to escalate the situation. "I'm sorry if I gave that impression. Officer, I'm just trying to understand why I was stopped." But Reynolds wasn't interested in explanations. If anything, her calmness only seemed to irritate him further. He scoffed, shaking his head as though amused by her audacity. "Oh, here we go. Playing innocent, that's rich." His tone shifted, becoming sharper, more biting. "Let me guess, you're gonna act like I'm harassing you next, right? Cry racism because I'm doing my job?" Jasmine stiffened, her stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore, it was something far uglier. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. suffocating her attempts to remain composed. Still, she refused to let him see her falter. "I'm not accusing you of anything," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I'm asking for clarity. That's all." Reynolds smirked, clearly unimpressed by her composure. "Clarity, huh? Well, let me clarify something for you, sweetheart. You were swerving back there. Looked real suspicious. So yeah, I pulled you over, and now you're acting like I've committed some crime." Swerving? Jasmine replayed the drive in her mind, retracing her route. She hadn't swerved. Not once. The road had been clear, and she'd stayed perfectly within her lane. There was no way she had given him cause to suspect reckless driving. But arguing wouldn't help. She needed to de-escalate to find common ground. "I appreciate your concern, officer," she said, softening her tone. "But I assure you, I wasn't swerving. Maybe it looked that way from a distance, but I promise I was driving safely." Her words fell flat. Reynolds rolled his eyes, dismissing her explanation entirely. "Yeah, okay. Sure thing." He tapped the roof of her car impatiently, signaling that their conversation was over. Or so he thought. What neither of them realized in that moment was that this exchange was being watched. Across the street, neighbors peered through curtains, curious about the commotion. A few brave souls ventured closer, lingering on sidewalks or leaning out of windows. One elderly man muttered under his breath, shaking his head at the scene unfolding before him. Another neighbor quietly pulled out her phone, capturing snippets of the interaction. Meanwhile, Marcus Johnson, a retired Army veteran known for his stoic demeanor and unwavering sense of justice, stood unnoticed at the edge of the crowd. Something about the officer's behavior struck him as deeply troubling. As he observed the growing tension, he made a decision. This wasn't going to end without accountability. Quietly, he raised his phone and began recording everything. The insults, the accusations, the palpable fear radiating from Jasmine's side of the car. Back at the scene, Officer Reynolds grew increasingly agitated. Jasmine's calm persistence infuriated him, chipping away at his authority, or so it seemed. He snapped his fingers loudly, startling her. "Out of the car," he ordered abruptly. "Now." Jasmine hesitated, confusion written across her face. "Why? What did I do wrong?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. Reynolds scowled, stepping back to give her room to exit. "Don't make me repeat myself," he growled. "Get out of the vehicle." Reluctantly, Jasmine complied. She opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, her hands raised slightly to show she posed no threat. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest. But she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. And yet, as she stood there facing him, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was spiraling dangerously out of control. Little did she know the worst was yet to come. As Jasmine stood on the pavement, her hands slightly raised in a gesture of compliance, Officer Reynolds circled her like a predator sizing up its prey. His eyes darted over her, scrutinizing every detail, from the way she held herself to the expression on her face. To him, her calm demeanor wasn't a sign of cooperation. It was an affront, a challenge to his authority. And he didn't take challenges lightly. "You know," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you're awfully confident for someone who's been pulled over by the police. Most people would be a little more respectful." He paused, letting the word hang in the air like a threat. "But I guess you're special, huh?" Jasmine swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, each syllable laced with judgment and disdain. Still, she refused to let him see her crack. Instead, she took a deep breath and replied as evenly as possible. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening, officer. I haven't done anything wrong." Reynolds smirked, clearly unimpressed by her composure. "Oh, so now you're the victim? Is that how this is going to go?" He shook his head, chuckling darkly under his breath. "You people always play the victim card. Always." The phrase "you people" hit Jasmine like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just offensive, it was deliberate, a calculated attempt to strip away her individuality and reduce her to a stereotype. She clenched her fists at her sides, fighting the urge to lash out. Anger bubbled inside her, but she knew better than to give him ammunition. So instead, she focused on staying calm, repeating a silent mantra in her head. Stay strong. Don't let him win. But Reynolds wasn't done. If anything, his tone grew sharper, more cutting. You think you're smarter than me, don't you? All those fancy degrees, teaching kids about history or whatever. You probably think you're untouchable. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space until she had no choice but to take a step back. Well, let me tell you something, sweetheart. Out here, none of that matters. Not your job, not your education, not your attitude. None of it. By now, a small crowd had gathered nearby. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows or walking home from work had stopped to observe the scene unfolding before them. Some whispered among themselves, while others recorded the encounter on their phones. One elderly woman clutched her chest, visibly shaken by what she was witnessing. Another man muttered angrily under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Despite the growing audience, Reynolds seemed oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't care. His focus remained solely on Jasmine, as if determined to break her spirit. What's the matter? He sneered, tilting his head mockingly. Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too good to answer me? Jasmine took another steadying breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I've answered all your questions, officer, she said firmly. I've shown you my license and registration. I've explained that I wasn't swerving. What else do you want from me? Her response only fueled his frustration. Reynolds threw up his hands in exaggerated exasperation. Unbelievable. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about answers. This is about respect. Something you clearly don't have for anyone but yourself. The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it was so far from reality. Jasmine prided herself on treating everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their background or position. But arguing with Reynolds would only dig her deeper into trouble. So she bit her tongue, choosing silence over confrontation. For a moment, there was a tense standoff. Jasmine stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest while Reynolds glared at her, his jaw clenched tight. Then, without warning, he reached for his belt and unclipped a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click echoed loudly in the stillness of the evening, drawing gasps from the onlookers. What are you doing? Jasmine asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. Why are you handcuffing me? I haven't done anything. Reynolds ignored her protests, stepping forward and grabbing her arm roughly. Stop resisting, he barked, twisting her wrist behind her back. This is your own fault. If you'd just cooperated from the start, we wouldn't be here right now. I have cooperated, Jasmine shot back, wincing as the cuffs tightened around her wrists. You're the one making this difficult. Difficult? Reynolds repeated, incredulously, shoving her toward his patrol car. You call standing there acting like you're above the law cooperating? Give me a break. As he pushed her forward, Jasmine stumbled, her knees nearly buckling beneath her. Pain shot through her arms as the cuffs dug into her skin, but she forced herself to stay upright, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from physical pain, but from the sheer injustice of the situation. How had things escalated so quickly? Why was he treating her like a criminal when she hadn't committed any crime? The crowd murmured uneasily, some stepping closer to intervene while others hesitated, unsure of what to do. Marcus Johnson, the retired Army veteran who had been quietly recording the entire encounter, stepped forward cautiously. Holding up his phone, he called out, "Officer, I've got this on camera. Everything you're doing right now is being recorded." Reynolds froze mid-motion, his grip on Jasmine loosening ever so slightly. For the first time since the stop began, uncertainty flickered across his face. He glanced at Marcus, then at the growing number of bystanders, many of whom were now openly filming the scene. His bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Mind your own business." Marcus crossed his arms, standing tall despite the tension radiating from the officer. "It becomes my business when I see someone being treated unfairly," he replied evenly. "And trust me, if you keep going, down this road the whole world will see exactly what kind of cop you are." A murmur rippled through the crowd, punctuated by nods of agreement. Someone shouted encouragement to Jasmine, telling her to stay strong. Another person called out to Reynolds, demanding to know why he was harassing an innocent woman. The atmosphere shifted, the balance of power tipping ever so slightly away from the officer. Jasmine, though still restrained, felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She wasn't alone anymore. The community had rallied around her, refusing to let this moment pass unnoticed. Even as tears streamed down her face, she straightened her posture, drawing strength from the support surrounding her. Reynolds, however, was unraveling. His earlier swagger had vanished, replaced by a desperate need to regain control. He looked from Jasmine to Marcus to the crowd, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. But the damage was done. The cameras rolling, the witnesses watching. The evidence against him was mounting with every passing second. And yet, even as the tide turned against him, Reynolds couldn't bring himself to admit defeat. Not yet. Clutching Jasmine's arm, once more he muttered under his breath, "This isn't over," but deep down they both knew it was. As Officer Reynolds tightened his grip on Jasmine's arm, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. The crowd around them buzzed with murmurs of outrage and disbelief, their collective anger simmering just below the surface. Jasmine, though still restrained, could feel the shift in energy. What had started as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into something far more sinister, and now it seemed the entire neighborhood was watching. Reynolds yanked Jasmine toward his patrol car, his movements jerky and aggressive. She stumbled again, her legs struggling to keep up with his hurried pace. Her wrists throbbed from the pressure of the handcuffs, which were far too tight, biting into her skin. Despite the pain, she gritted her teeth and forced herself to stay upright. Falling would only give him another excuse to justify his actions, and she refused to let him twist the narrative further. "Get in the car," he barked, shoving her toward the open door of the cruiser. His voice carried over the growing din of the crowd, sharp and commanding, but there was an undercurrent of unease that hadn't been there before. Marcus Johnson's warning about the video footage had clearly rattled him, though he tried hard to mask it. Jasmine hesitated, glancing back at the crowd for support. Faces stared back at her, some angry, some sympathetic, all united by a shared sense of injustice. A teenage boy held up his phone, capturing every moment of the encounter. An elderly woman clutched her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks, as she whispered prayers under her breath. And then there was Marcus, standing tall and resolute, his phone steady in his hand, ensuring that nothing escaped the lens. "You can't do this," someone shouted from the sidelines. It was one of Jasmine's neighbors, a middle-aged man named Mr. Carter who lived 2 doors down. He stepped closer, pointing a finger at Reynolds. "She hasn't done anything wrong. You're harassing her because of who she is." The accusation hung heavy in the air, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Reynolds turned sharply, glaring at Mr. Carter with barely concealed contempt. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped, his voice rising to match the volume of the protests. "Stay out of it unless you want trouble." But Mr. Carter didn't back down. Instead, he crossed his arms defiantly, planting himself firmly between Reynolds and the growing throng of supporters. "Trouble? You think we're afraid of trouble? Look at yourself, man. You've got no reason to treat her like this." Reynolds's jaw clenched, his patience visibly fraying. For a brief moment it seemed as though he might lash out, not just at Jasmine, but at anyone who dared challenge him. But then he caught sight of the sea of phones pointed in his direction, recording devices capturing every word, every movement, every second of this escalating confrontation. His bravado faltered once more, replaced by a flicker of panic. Turning back to Jasmine, he shoved her roughly into the back seat of the patrol car, slamming the door shut behind her. The sound echoed through the quiet street, punctuating the gravity of the moment. Inside the vehicle, Jasmine sat stiffly, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Through the window, she could see the crowd pressing closer, their voices blending into a chorus of defiance. "This is wrong," a young woman yelled, stepping forward with her phone raised high. "Let her go, she didn't do anything." Others joined in, their chants growing louder and more insistent. "No justice, no peace," someone called out, prompting others to repeat the phrase in unison. The rhythm of their voices filled the night, a powerful reminder that they stood together, not just for Jasmine, but for everyone who had ever felt the weight of systemic injustice. Inside the car, Jasmine fought back tears. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but she knew better than to give Reynolds any more ammunition. So instead, she focused on breathing, on keeping herself grounded despite the chaos swirling around her. She thought of her students, of the lessons she taught them about resilience and courage. "If I can't show strength now," she told herself, "how can I expect them to believe in their own?" Outside, the situation continued to escalate. Marcus stepped forward again, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Officer Reynolds," he said firmly, "you need to stop this right now. Whatever your reasons are for doing this, they don't justify what you're putting her through. Let her go before things get worse for both of you." Reynolds spun around, his face flushed with anger and frustration. "Worse? You think this can get worse?" he spat, gesturing wildly at the crowd. "You people always act like you're the victims, but look at yourselves. You're the ones causing problems here." His words only fueled the fire. The crowd surged forward, closing the gap between them and the officer. Someone handed Jasmine a tissue through the open window, offering her a small measure of comfort. Another person placed a reassuring hand on the roof of the car, silently letting her know she wasn't alone. Marcus took another step closer, his tone calm but firm. "You're digging yourself deeper, Reynolds. Every insult, every shove, every second of this is being recorded. Do you really want to explain this to your superiors? To the media? To the whole world?" For the first time since the encounter began, Reynolds looked genuinely rattled. He glanced at the crowd, at the phones pointed in his direction, at the woman sitting helplessly in the back of his patrol car. His mind raced, trying to calculate his next move. He couldn't deny the evidence against him, not with so many witnesses, not with cameras rolling. Yet admitting defeat meant swallowing his pride, something he wasn't accustomed to doing. He ran a shaky hand through his hair, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of accountability. The crowd sensed his hesitation, pressing their advantage. "Let her go," they chanted, their voices growing louder with each passing second. "Let her go, let her go." Finally, unable to bear the pressure any longer, Reynolds reached for his radio. His fingers trembled as he called for backup, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "I need assistance at my location," he muttered, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Code 415, disturbance. The transmission crackled through the air, a lifeline for a man drowning in his own mistakes. But even as he waited for reinforcements, the damage was undeniable. The crowd had grown larger, their resolve stronger. Neighbors who had initially stayed on the sidelines now joined the protest, their presence a testament to the power of unity. Jasmine watched it all unfold from inside the car, her emotions a whirlwind of fear, anger, and gratitude. She thought about the countless others who had faced similar situations, people whose stories hadn't ended with a supportive crowd or a witness brave enough to record the truth. She realized in that moment how fortunate she was to have allies willing to stand up for her, but she also knew that luck wasn't enough. Real change required action, persistence, and courage. As the minutes ticked by, the standoff showed no signs of abating. The crowd refused to disperse, their cries for justice echoing through the streets. Reynolds paced nervously beside his patrol car, casting furtive glances at the gathering masses. He knew he was losing control, and worse, he knew the consequences of his actions would follow him long after this night ended. And yet, amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. This wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt powerless in the face of authority. It was about proving that when communities came together, they could shine a light on darkness and force those in power to reckon with their choices. For Jasmine, the ordeal was far from over. But as she looked out at the faces of her neighbors, at the strangers turned allies who had risen to her defense, she allowed herself a small, determined smile. They had shown her that she wasn't fighting alone, and that perhaps was the most powerful weapon of all. As the standoff between Officer Reynolds and the crowd continued, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation, as if everyone knew something monumental was about to happen, but no one could predict exactly what. Jasmine sat in the back of the patrol car, her heart racing as she watched the scene unfold through the window. She felt like a spectator in her own life, powerless yet strangely emboldened by the support surrounding her. Reynolds paced, nervously beside his cruiser, his earlier swagger replaced by an unmistakable sense of unease. His eyes darted between the growing crowd, Marcus's phone, and the distant glow of approaching police sirens. Backup was on its way, but it wouldn't arrive soon enough to save him from the immediate pressure bearing down on him. Every chant, every accusatory glare, every recording device pointed in his direction chipped away at his composure. Marcus stepped forward again, his voice steady and commanding. "Officer," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you've made your point. You've shown us who you are. Now it's time to make things right." Reynolds stopped pacing and turned to face him, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "Make things right," he echoed incredulously. "You think I'm the bad guy here? Look around you. This is chaos because of her." He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, but the crowd didn't react the way he expected. Instead of backing down or shifting their focus, they erupted into louder chants. "Let her go," they shouted, in unison, their voices rising above the hum of the neighborhood. Children clung to their parents' legs, watching wide-eyed as adults stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their demand for justice. Jasmine's chest tightened as she listened to the chorus of voices outside. It wasn't just anger fueling them, it was resolve. These weren't strangers anymore. They were her community, her neighbors, her allies. People who had seen her walking her dog in the mornings, chatting with shopkeepers, teaching kids at the local school. They knew her, and they refused to let her be treated like a criminal without cause. One woman broke away from the crowd and approached the patrol car cautiously. She was older, with graying hair and kind eyes that softened when they met Jasmine's gaze. In her hands, she held a bottle of water and a small towel. "Here," she said gently, passing them through the open window. "Take this. You don't deserve this." Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes as she accepted the items. Her throat was parched-sized text due to length constraints. "Please confirm if you'd like me to continue expanding Part 4 further or proceed to the next part." As the moments dragged on, Officer Reynolds' confidence continued to crumble. The once authoritative figure now looked like a man backed into a corner, his options dwindling with each passing second. He glanced nervously at the growing crowd, their chants echoing louder and more insistent. His eyes flicked toward Marcus, whose phone remained steadfastly pointed at him, capturing every movement, every word, every bead of sweat forming on his forehead. The distant wail of sirens grew closer, signaling the arrival of backup. But instead of relief, Reynolds felt a fresh wave of panic. What would his fellow officers think when they arrived? Would they see him as a competent law enforcer doing his job, or as someone who had lost control of the situation entirely? Worse still, what would happen if the video footage went viral? The thought alone made his stomach churn. He shifted uncomfortably, his hands trembling as he adjusted his belt. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about Jasmine anymore, it was about accountability. It was about facing the consequences of his actions, not just today, but potentially for the rest of his career. "You don't understand," Reynolds muttered under his breath almost to himself. "This isn't how it's supposed to go." Marcus heard him and raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" he asked, his tone calm but piercing. "Did you think no one would care? That people wouldn't notice when you treated an innocent woman like a criminal?" Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away, running a hand over his face as though trying to wipe away the reality of the situation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, tinged with desperation. I was following procedure," he stammered, though even he didn't sound convinced. "Procedure?" Marcus shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Is this what you call procedure? Handcuffing someone because they dared to ask questions? Because they didn't cower in fear when you barked orders at them?" The crowd murmured in agreement, their anger simmering just below the surface. Some nodded vigorously, while others called out accusations of their own. "You're abusing your power," one man shouted. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Reynolds flinched at the words, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the crowd's judgment was too much to bear. He glanced at Jasmine, still sitting silently in the back of the patrol car, her expression unreadable through the window. Her quiet strength unnerved him. She wasn't yelling, crying, or begging for mercy. She was simply enduring, her dignity intact despite everything he'd thrown at her. For a brief moment, guilt flickered across his face. But it was quickly replaced by panic as he realized the implications of the video footage. If Marcus uploaded it online, and there was no reason to believe he wouldn't, the entire world would see exactly what kind of officer Reynolds was. His reputation, his career, his life as he knew it would be over. Desperation took hold. Without warning, Reynolds dropped to one knee in front of the patrol car, his voice trembling as he addressed Jasmine through the open window. "Please," he begged, his tone unrecognizable from the harshness of earlier. "Please don't let this get out. I made a mistake. I can fix this." The sudden shift stunned everyone into silence. The crowd froze, unsure how to react to the sight of a police officer kneeling before the very person he had humiliated and handcuffed mere minutes ago. Even Marcus lowered his phone slightly, his brow furrowing in disbelief. Jasmine stared at Reynolds, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this. Part of her wanted to lash out, to make him feel the same humiliation and helplessness she had endured. But another part of her, a deeper, more compassionate part, recognized the humanity in his plea. He was scared just as she had been scared. And while his fear didn't excuse his behavior, it did reveal something important. He wasn't invincible. Beneath the uniform and the badge was a man capable of making mistakes and perhaps capable of learning from them. Still, forgiveness wasn't hers to give freely. Not yet. Not without conditions. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "If you want me to consider not sharing this," she said loud enough for the crowd to hear, "you need to do something for me." Reynolds nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with hope. "Anything," he promised. "Just tell me what you want." Jasmine hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "First," she began, "you need to apologize to me and to everyone here. Not just some half-hearted, 'I'm sorry.' A real apology. One that acknowledges what you did wrong." The officer swallowed hard, nodding again. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "I'll do it." "And second," Jasmine continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "you need to agree to cooperate fully with any investigation into your conduct. No excuses, no lies. Just the truth." Reynolds hesitated this time, his jaw tightening briefly before he forced himself to nod once more. "Fine," he agreed reluctantly. "Whatever you want." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some approving of Jasmine's demands while others remained skeptical. Could they trust him to keep his promises? Or was this just another tactic to save face? Before anyone could respond, the sound of screeching tires interrupted the tense standoff. Backup had arrived. 2 additional police cruisers pulled up behind Reynolds' vehicle, their flashing lights bathing the scene in alternating red and blue hues. Officers spilled out of the cars, their expressions wary as they surveyed the chaotic gathering. One of them, a sergeant with graying hair and a stern demeanor, approached cautiously. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, then landing on Reynolds, who was still kneeling beside the patrol car. No one spoke at first. The silence stretched taut, heavy with unspoken accusations and unresolved tension. Finally, Marcus stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I think you should watch this," he said simply, pressing play on the recorded footage. The sergeant frowned, taking the device and watching the screen intently. As the video played, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to outright disapproval. By the time it ended, his lips were pressed into a thin line, and his eyes bore into Reynolds with barely concealed disappointment. "This is unacceptable," the sergeant declared, his voice firm and authoritative. Turning to the other officers, he gestured for them to take charge of the situation. "Remove the cuffs," he ordered, nodding toward Jasmine, "and get her statement. We'll handle this internally." Relief washed over Jasmine as one of the officers opened the door and carefully removed the handcuffs from her wrists. The cool night air hit her skin, a welcome sensation after the oppressive confines of the patrol car. She flexed her fingers, wincing slightly at the lingering ache, but otherwise remained composed. As the crowd erupted into cheers and applause, Reynolds slowly rose to his feet, his head bowed in shame. He mumbled another apology to Jasmine, though she barely acknowledged it. Her focus was elsewhere, on the neighbors who had rallied around her, on Marcus who had risked his safety to record the truth, and on the realization that sometimes, standing together could bring about change. For now, the immediate crisis was over, but Jasmine knew this was only the beginning. There would be investigations, hearings, and difficult conversations ahead. Justice rarely came easily, especially in cases like these. But tonight, in this small corner of Atlanta, a community had stood united against injustice, and that was a victory worth celebrating.